Hey guys, Eric Smith here, Five Reasons Sports. In today's video, we are going to talk about my top options for the Miami Dolphins in the 2025 NFL Draft. But before we talk about my options for the Dolphins, let's talk about the players we're not going to consider. So I went over to NFLmockdraftdatabase.com and pulled up their consensus mock draft. And players that had over a 25% chance on their consensus mock draft are ones we're really not going to talk about here. So that's going to be Cam Ward to the Titans, Abdul Carter to the Browns, Travis Hunter to the Giants, Will Campbell to the Patriots, Mason Graham to the Jaguars, Ashton Jeanty to the Raiders, Armand Membao to the Jets, Jalen Walker to the Panthers, and Tet McMillan to the Cowboys. So with those guys out of the way, let's talk about the ones that I do feel could be good options for the Dolphins. All right, at the top of my list is going to be cornerback from Michigan, Will Johnson. So talking about the good things with Will Johnson, he's got really good size for an outside cornerback at 6'2", 194 pounds. He is good in every kind of coverage, right? Man, zone, press, playing off. He's got great ball skills and anticipation. Only had 2 interceptions in 2024, but both of those were returned for touchdowns. On the bad side for Johnson, the biggest thing is the injuries, right? He missed the second half of 2024 with a turf toe injury that turned out to be some torn ligaments in his toe, and that prevented him from running until mid-January. And then he did not run at the combine, and between the combine and his pro day with Michigan, suffered a hamstring injury, so he didn't run at Michigan's pro day either. The only real negative that I could find for on-field stuff is lack of experience in the slot. And that probably isn't a lack of ability, just more a lack of reps in the slot, only doing it 3% last year. But Will Johnson is a player that I feel is a lockdown corner, early day one starter. Without the injury concern, he would be a top 5 pick almost certainly. And hopefully, before the draft rolls around, some individual teams have an opportunity to see him run, and they can kind of push the injury concerns to the side a little bit. Obviously, toe injuries can be lingering for defensive backs, but given the risk, right, if he comes up and he's able to run and able to, show that he is fully recovered and then still has time before the season starts, Will Johnson would be my top option at number 13 if he's still on the board. If Will Johnson's off the board at 13, a good consolation prize and maybe the top player on the Dolphins board is going to be Texas cornerback Jade Barron. Barron has good size for a cornerback at 5'11", 194. Maybe not quite as good as Will Johnson, but he was a slot cornerback in 2022 and 23 before moving to the outside in 2024. He still bumped inside in nickel and dime defenses, playing 12.8% in the slot in 2024. But the narrative that he is only a slot cornerback is misguided because that's not even what he did for the most part in 2024. Texas moved him around all over the place, even playing some linebacker and safety roles on passing downs to take advantage of his ability to read and break on plays. One of the potential negatives with Barron, if we're looking at him as a top cornerback, is his lack of experience in press coverage. And similar to Will Johnson and his experience as a slot defender, I think that's more about opportunity than ability. I think that Barron would be fine up in press coverage. Maybe not the physical specimen that Will Johnson is, but this is not a player that can't mix it up. He is a older prospect. He's going to turn 24 in December of his rookie season. And part of that was that he was a freshman in 2020, which was the COVID year. And then, he could have come out last year and been a high draft pick. But in today's world with the NIL, he was paid quite a bit of money to stay at Texas. I think that's going to be something that we see going forward with college prospects as guys that decide to stay in college that extra year and continue to collect that NIL money. This does mean that Barron will be, if he is a first-round pick and they pick up the fifth-year option, he'll be turning 29 at the end of his rookie contract. But I see Barron very much in the same mold that I see Jalen Ramsey in terms of a player that can step in from day one, can play on the outside, can play in the slot. And as he grows into his career, as the physical skills start to wane, it's a guy that can move and still play safety. So I'm not as concerned with Barron turning 29 at the end of his rookie contract as I would with somebody like Will Johnson, who I see as more of strictly a corner. But like I said, this player, Jade Barron, fits the athletic mold of what Chris Grier has drafted for defensive backs almost to a T. So even though I have Will Johnson as number one on my list, Jade Barron could very well be on the top of the list for the Dolphins. Next on my list is going to be Georgia safety Malachi Starks, another player that has good size for a defensive back at 6'1", 197 pounds. Very experienced, starting 14 games each of the last 3 seasons at Georgia for a total of 52. He's a guy that's very instinctive. When he sees something in front of him, he triggers instantly. He's very aggressive, but not reckless. He easily identifies and breaks up screen passes. He's a very dependable tackler. Someone that's not afraid to come up and mix it up, taking on blocks or supporting the run game. On the bad side, not a whole lot here. Lack of experience as a blitzer can be taken as a negative. Only 21 career pass rushes for Starks, but similar to Johnson and Barron, that could certainly be more a opportunity versus ability thing. Um, Also had pretty underwhelming combine testing. If the Dolphins were to draft Malachi Starks, he would set new lows for several of the measurements tested based on defensive backs that Chris Grier's drafted. But despite the low combine testing, he still really had good on-field metrics. So like the GPS data that was tracking him running and stuff like that. And then the other negative for Malachi Starks is just positional value. When you're talking about taking a safety at number 13 overall, that can be viewed as a little high by some people. All right, and then talking about positional value, next on the list is going to be Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State. So on the good side for Warren is his size, 6'6", 256 pounds. Penn State moved him everywhere. He played in line, out wide, lined up at running back, lined up as a wildcat quarterback, lined up under center as a short yardage QB. That really speaks to his intelligence. Tight end is one of the most difficult positions to transition in the NFL, but his ability to pick up the playbook and move all over the place kind of helps to alleviate some of those worries when it comes to Warren transitioning to the NFL. He is effective at the point of attack on strong side, outside zones. Not a dominant blocker, but there really is not that dominant both blocker and receiver in this draft. And Warren is, by far the closest thing that can do both of those things. Very good at the catch point and running after the catch as well. On the negative side for Warren, had limited production during his first 3 seasons before a solid 2023. And then he had a breakout season in 2024 with over 1,200 yards receiving. He's not the dynamic athlete that's coveted with most elite tight ends, and that can result in a lack of separation versus the more capable defenders that he's facing in coverage. And he didn't test at the combine, so there are some questions regarding just how athletic he really is. But in the end, Tyler Warren is a player that I think could really transform this offense. We saw last year how, the run game really struggled, especially when the injuries piled up at the tackles, right? But the tight end, specifically Julian Hill and Durham Smythe, both really struggled in the run game. Tyler Warren would come in and be more effective than either of those guys in the run game, while also giving a big boost to the passing game. And, I get the concern over having Jonnu Smith, but Jonnu didn't really line up in line very much. And there are plenty of snaps available to be able to have two tight ends on the field along with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So I don't think that would be a reason not to draft Tyler Warren, but definitely a player that could change the offense, but could be tough to draft in this position based on a tight end going in the top 15. All right. And then fifth, and finally, we're going to talk about alternatives here, right? So one scenario is that somebody starts dropping, right? Maybe it's a Mason Graham or an Ashton Genty. And we have a scenario like in the movie Draft Day when the Browns trade for the number one pick and they're expected to take Bo Callahan. And Kevin Costner says, we have to figure out what Bo's something is, and is it something you can live with? Right. So these are players that are completely expected to go in that top 10. And if they're not, then it's for a reason. Right. And maybe they didn't dive in as far as they should have. But, if that opportunity presents itself, then maybe you throw everything else out the window and you take a player that is expected to go in the top 10, but has fallen into your lap. Outside of that, there's trade down scenarios, right? So maybe you decide that Malachi Starks or Tyler Warren is the top player on your board, but you understand that safety and tight end is not a position of value in the top 15. And you feel like you can trade down a little bit, pick up some extra assets, and still get your guy. Or maybe it's multiple guys are falling, right? Maybe you really like Will Johnson and Jade Barron, and they're both on the board at 13, and you feel that you can, again, trade down, get extra assets, and still get one of the guys that you really like, right? And then the other scenario is that, maybe the Dolphins aren't as high as I am on some of these guys, but they are as high on, defensive linemen or offensive linemen. And those positions, I feel, outside of a few guys are, kind of similar, right? There's talk of Kenneth Grant being drafted at 13, but in my opinion, you've got other guys like Tyleik Williams, Alfred Collins, Derek Harmon. Those are all guys that I value almost as much as Kenneth Grant, right? So if you told me that I could either trade down or wait to the second round to get one of these other guys, then I would, pass up a guy like Kenneth Grant for that. And same idea with the offensive linemen, right? There's a couple of them that are expected to go before 13, but there's also other guys like Kelvin Banks and Josh Simmons that if you decide that you want to solidify the offensive line further and, you don't want to do it at 13, you could trade down and still have a solid shot at picking up one of those players. In the end, I think 13 is a good place to be in this draft. You should still have at least one guy you really like at 13, but the talent probably falls off shortly after that. And you can see that in this video, we haven't loaded up on prospects at one position, and that's kind of where you want to be heading into the draft. For one, you're not letting other teams know what you're going to do to give them the opportunity to trade in front or to know what kind of value to offer to trade down. And you're putting yourself in a position to, get the true BPA, best player available, on your board. But the reality is, we've got no idea what Chris Grier and the Dolphins are going to do. Last year, I expected them to take players that would be immediate contributors in 2024, and then they turned around and drafted a situational pass rusher in round one and a project left tackle in round two. One thing to remember here is that the draft is not the final piece of the puzzle. There's another round of free agency to help fill the gaps before mini camps and the new season really begins. And we're now just 2 weeks away from seeing what the Dolphins do in the actual draft. Appreciate you guys watching.